In the gleaming boardroom of Meridian Industries, a brilliant young engineer was about to face corporate betrayal. What started as a routine presentation of revolutionary AI innovations took a shocking turn when she came face to face with systematic theft. Emma Rodriguez wasn't your typical tech employee. For 3 years, she had spent her life developing breakthrough technologies at Seattle's most prestigious corporation, known for her meticulous documentation and engineering brilliance. When she encountered CEO Richard Blackstone dismissing her life's work as amateur hour, she had no idea she was walking into a battle that would consume everything. Rodriguez possessed something that would lead to the largest intellectual property lawsuit in federal court history. What began as corporate humiliation would become a $67 million legal victory. The tech industry would never be the same after one engineer proved that individual innovation could defeat corporate predation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Rodriguez stood at the head of Meridian Industries' mahogany conference table, her laptop connected to the room's massive display screen. 23 floors above Seattle's tech corridor, the boardroom's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city's innovation district, a vista that had once inspired her when she first joined the company 3 years ago. Today, it felt like a stage for either triumph or disaster. The room held 12 people, but Emma's attention fixed on the investors seated along the far wall. Margaret Chen from Cascade Capital leaned forward, her eyes sharp with interest. David Park from Nexus Ventures had his tablet out, taking note. These were the decision-makers who could greenlight her project with a nod, transforming 3 years of sleepless nights into reality. The Aria ecosystem, Emma began, her voice steady despite the caffeine tremors in her hands, represents the next evolution in AI-driven consumer technology. Not another smart speaker or fitness tracker, but a truly integrated intelligence that learns, adapts, and anticipates. She clicked to her first slide, a visualization of interconnected devices flowing seamlessly through a user's daily routine. Traditional smart home systems respond to commands. Aria predicts needs. It notices when you wake up 15 minutes early 3 days in a row and adjusts your morning routine accordingly. It detects subtle changes in your voice patterns that suggest you're getting sick and proactively schedules a telehealth consultation. Margaret Chen nodded, scribbling something in her notebook. Emma felt a flutter of hope. But Aria goes beyond reactive intelligence, Emma continued, warming to her subject. The second component, the predictive health monitor, uses continuous biometric analysis through non-invasive sensors embedded in everyday objects. Your coffee mug tracks hydration and stress hormone. Your bathroom mirror monitors skin tone and eye clarity. The system builds a comprehensive health profile that can identify potential issues weeks before symptoms appear. Richard Blackstone, CEO and founder of Meridian Industries, sat at the far end of the table. His position at the head, opposite from where Emma stood, felt deliberately territorial. His fingers drummed against the polished wood, and his expression remained unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. The third innovation, Emma said, advancing to her most ambitious concept, is the adaptive learning interface. Traditional AI assistants use voice commands or touch screens. ALI reads micro-expressions, body language, and environmental cues to understand intent before you've even articulated it. Imagine an interface that knows you want to order coffee because it recognizes you're running late, notes you skipped breakfast, and detects the stress markers in your posture. She had practiced this presentation dozens of times, but standing here, surrounded by people who could change everything, the familiar words carried new weight. This wasn't just about technology, it was about proving that a 28-year-old engineer from Austin could revolutionize how humans interact with machines. Blackstone raised his hand, cutting through Emma's momentum. Miss Rodriguez, this all sounds very aspirational, but let's talk practicality. Consumer adoption curves for new interfaces are notoriously slow. How do you plan to overcome the inherent resistance to surveillance-level monitoring in the home? Emma had anticipated this question. The key is transparency and incremental implementation. Users start with basic features, smart scheduling, simple health tracking. As trust builds, they opt into more advanced capabilities. Our beta testing shows a 94% satisfaction rate and an average of 3 feature upgrades per user within the first month. Beta testing, Blackstone repeated, his tone suggesting mild amusement. How many participants? 237 households across 6 demographics. And the development timeline for full commercialization. Emma felt her confidence solidify. She had numbers, projections, concrete plans. 18 months for ARIA core deployment, 24 for the full ecosystem integration. The hardware partnerships are already in place with Chen Electronics and Nordic Sense. Manufacturing could begin within. Manufacturing, Blackstone interrupted again, this time with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. You've discussed manufacturing partnerships without approval from this board. The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Emma realized she had walked into a trap, but she couldn't see the mechanism yet. Preliminary discussions only, non-disclosure agreements were signed for all technical specifications. Jessica Williams, Emma's former college roommate and current Meridian senior manager, shifted uncomfortably in her chair near the back wall. Their eyes met briefly, and Emma caught something that looked like warning in Jessica's expression. David Park from Nexus Ventures leaned forward. The predictive algorithms alone could be worth hundreds of millions in licensing. The healthcare applications are revolutionary. Margaret Chen nodded agreement. The integration possibilities across industries, automotive, hospitality, retail. This could be transformative. Emma felt momentum building again. The investors understood the vision. They could see past Blackstone's skepticism to the real potential. But Blackstone wasn't finished. Miss Rodriguez, I'm curious about your background. MIT engineering, certainly impressive. But innovation requires more than academic credentials. It requires understanding market realities, consumer psychology, manufacturing complexities. What makes you think you're qualified to lead a project of this magnitude? The question landed like a physical blow. Emma had prepared for technical challenges, market concerns, competitive analysis. She hadn't prepared for a direct assault on her qualifications in front of investors who could make or break her career. I've spent 3 years at Meridian studying these exact challenges, she replied, fighting to keep her voice level. I've worked with our consumer research team, collaborated with manufacturing partners, and tested every assumption in real-world conditions. This isn't theoretical speculation, it's engineered reality ready for implementation. Blackstone leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. The gesture reminded Emma of a spider considering prey. Engineered reality. That's a confident assessment from someone who's never launched a consumer product. The silence that followed felt endless. Emma could hear the subtle hum of the building's ventilation system, the distant traffic, 23 floors below. Margaret Chen's pen had stopped moving. David Park's tablet lay flat on the table. In my experience, Blackstone continued, his voice carrying across the room with practiced authority, the most dangerous engineers are the ones who mistake technical competence for business acumen. This presentation, it's amateur hour. The words hit Emma like ice water. Around the table, she watched faces shift, not with disagreement, but with the careful neutrality of people avoiding association with failure. The investors who had been taking notes moments before now studied their hand. The concepts show promise, Blackstone said, standing to signal the meeting's end, but they need significant development before they're ready for serious consideration. I suggest Miss Rodriguez return to her current assignments, while we explore these ideas through more experienced channel. Emma stood frozen, as the room began to empty. The investors filed out without making eye contact, their earlier enthusiasm evaporated. Jessica lingered near the door, her expression pained, but she didn't approach. As Emma gathered her materials with hands that she willed not to shake, she caught fragments of conversation from the hallway. Blackstone's voice, pitched low but audible. Interesting concepts, internal development opportunities, fresh perspective on the technical challenge. The realization hit her like a physical blow. He wasn't dismissing her ideas, he was dismissing her, the innovations, the algorithms, the 3 years of work. He intended to keep all of it, just without her name attached. Security appeared to escort her out, their presence making the humiliation complete. As she walked through Meridian's gleaming corridors for what she now understood would be the last time, Emma's mind raced beyond the immediate shock. Her engineering background had taught her to document everything, to build redundancies, to prepare for system failures. She had prepared for technical problems, market resistance, even investor skepticism, but she had never prepared for the possibility that success and betrayal could arrive in the same moment. The elevator doors closed, cutting off her view of the 23rd floor. Emma Rodriguez descended toward the street level, carrying her laptop bag and 3 years of innovations that Richard Blackstone clearly intended to claim as his own. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that an engineer who documents everything doesn't just save the final presentation. She saves everything that led to it, every iteration, every breakthrough, every proof of concept. And some things, the most important things, she had protected in ways that went far beyond corporate security protocol. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Emma stepped into the Seattle afternoon, carrying secrets that would soon become weapons in a war she was only beginning to understand how to fight. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Emma stepped into the Seattle afternoon, carrying secrets that would soon become weapons in a war she was only beginning to understand how to fight. 3 hours later, she sat in her Capitol Hill apartment, staring at the termination paperwork that had been delivered by courier. Effective immediately, the letter read, due to restructuring and performance evaluation outcomes. Performance evaluation, the irony burned. 3 years of exemplary reviews, innovation awards, and now this corporate euphemism for public humiliation. Emma's one-bedroom apartment felt smaller than usual, cluttered with the detritus of a dedicated engineer's life, circuit boards, prototype housings, and towers of technical journals. She'd brought work home every night, driven by the belief that excellence would be recognized and rewarded. The naive optimism of that assumption now felt like a personal failing. She opened her laptop and began organizing files, a mechanical process that helped calm her racing thoughts. As an engineer, she documented everything, not from paranoia but from habit. System failures taught you to keep backups. Design iterations required version control. Progress demanded measurement. What she discovered in her personal archives surprised even her. The ARIA development timeline stretched back 14 months, beginning with her first sketches of predictive algorithms. Every major breakthrough was timestamped in her personal files, each innovation carefully documented with screenshots, code snippets, and detailed explanation. Her external hard drives contained complete development histories that painted a clear picture of intellectual evolution. But the real revelation came when she found her patent filing folder. Emma had filed provisional patents for all 3 core innovations: ARIA's predictive intelligence, the health monitoring system, and the adaptive learning interface. Not from suspicion of corporate theft, but because her father had drummed intellectual property protection into her head since childhood. In Texas, we brand our cattle, he'd say. In tech, you patent your ideas. The filing dates made her hands tremble. ARIA Core System, filed September 15. Health Monitoring Algorithms, filed October 2. Adaptive Learning Protocols, filed October 18. All dated weeks before her presentation to the board. Emma's phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. "Are you okay? What happened in there was wrong." Instead of responding, Emma opened her browser and began researching Richard Blackstone's history. What she found painted a disturbing pattern. Marcus Weber, former lead architect, had left Meridian in 2019, after developing revolutionary cloud storage optimization. 6 months later, Meridian announced proprietary storage innovations that bore suspicious similarities to Marcus's work. Sarah Kim, AI researcher, departed in 2021, following the development of natural language processing improvement. Meridian's subsequent voice interface updates incorporated nearly identical methodologies. 3 former employees, 3 suspicious departures, 3 subsequent product launches that echoed their innovations. Emma's phone rang. Michael Thompson, patent attorney according to the caller ID. She'd submitted an inquiry through his website an hour ago, expecting a callback tomorrow. "Ms. Rodriguez, I reviewed the preliminary information you submitted. This is urgent enough that I wanted to call immediately." Urgent. If what you've described is accurate, documented innovations, provisional patents, filed before corporate presentation, and now termination followed by suspected appropriation. You may have grounds for significant intellectual property theft claim. Emma felt something shift inside her chest, a sensation like tectonic plates realigning. Significant how? Patent infringement damages are calculated based on the commercial value of the stolen innovations. AI-driven consumer ecosystems could be worth hundreds of millions in licensing alone. If we can prove willful infringement, which your timeline suggests, damages could be tripled. The number made Emma's apartment feel too small to contain the implications. I need to understand something. Are you talking about litigation against Meridian Industries, against Richard Blackstone personally? Both, potentially. Corporate liability for patent infringement, personal liability for conspiracy to steal intellectual property. But I need to review your documentation before making specific recommendations. Can you meet tomorrow? After hanging up, Emma returned to her research with new focus. Blackstone's biography revealed the ruthless pragmatism that had built Meridian from a garage startup into a tech giant. Divorced twice, estranged from his children, known for aggressive acquisitions and strategic talent optimization. Corporate speak for stealing the best people and ideas from competitors. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Jessica. Call me, please. Emma ignored it. Jessica had sat in that boardroom and watched Blackstone destroy her friend's career. Whatever discomfort she felt now was secondary to the choice she'd made in the moment that mattered. Instead, Emma opened her patent monitoring software, a tool she'd developed to track Meridian's intellectual property filings. If Blackstone intended to appropriate her innovations, he would need to file patents or risk losing them to competitors. Corporate theft required corporate protection. She set up automated alerts for any filings containing keywords related to her technologies. Predictive AI, adaptive interfaces, continuous health monitoring, behavioral prediction algorithms. If Meridian tried to patent her work, she would know within hours. The monitoring system complete, Emma leaned back in her desk chair and surveyed her apartment. 12 hours ago, she'd been a Meridian employee with dreams of changing the world through technology. Now she was unemployed, armed with legal documentation, and contemplating a war against one of Seattle's most powerful corporations. Her laptop chimed with an incoming email. The sender made her blood freeze. Richard Blackstone. Emma, the message read, I hope you understand that today's decision was based on business necessities, not personal judgment. Your technical skills are undeniable, and I'm sure you'll find opportunities better suited to your experience level. As discussed, Meridian will continue exploring the concepts you presented, developed through our internal resources. I trust you'll respect the confidential nature of those discussions. Best wishes for your future endeavors. The email's casual tone, the suggestion that her termination was somehow benevolent, revealed Blackstone's complete confidence that he'd neutralized any threat she might pose. He saw her as a discarded employee, not an adversary armed with legal protection and documentary evidence. Emma inked a new document and began typing. Not a response to Blackstone that would come through attorneys. Instead, she started a timeline, every meeting, every presentation, every conversation about her innovation, every email, every sketch, every late-night breakthrough that had led to this moment. If Richard Blackstone wanted to steal her life's work, he would discover that some engineers build more than just products. They build cases, they document evidence, they prepare for the possibility that success and betrayal might arrive in the same moment. By morning, Emma would be ready to show him exactly how much he'd underestimated the young woman he'd dismissed as amateur hour. The coffee shop where she met Michael Thompson buzzed with the early morning energy of Seattle's tech workers, laptops open, conversations mixing venture capital with caffeine. Emma chose a corner table, her back to the wall, a habit inherited from her father's police training. Michael Thompson arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather briefcase that suggested successful practice without ostentation. Mid-30s, carefully groomed, with the focused attention of someone who'd learned to read complex situations quickly. Rodriguez, he said, settling across from her. I've spent the evening reviewing similar cases. What you've described has happened before, but rarely with documentation this comprehensive. Emma opened her laptop, displaying the patent filing timeline. Everything's here: development logs, filing dates, email chains with manufacturing partners. I document obsessively. Michael studied the screen, his expression growing more serious. This level of documentation is unusual. Most engineers trust their employers. They don't prepare for intellectual property theft. My father taught me to protect my work. He said ideas without protection are just wishful thinking. Smart man. Michael leaned back, his assessment complete. I'll be direct. Suing Meridian Industries means taking on one of Seattle's most powerful corporations. They'll use every legal and extra-legal tactic to destroy your case and your reputation. Are you prepared for that level of warfare? Emma had spent the night considering exactly that question. What's the alternative? Watch them profit from 3 years of my work, while I find another job and pretend it never happened. Some people choose that path. It's safer. I'm not some people. Michael's smile held approval and concern in equal measure. Then we need to build an airtight case. Patent infringement is just the beginning. If we can prove deliberate theft, conspiracy, and willful appropriation, we're looking at enhanced damages. For the next 2 hours, they methodically reviewed Emma's documentation. Michael's legal mind found patterns and implications that Emma's engineering focus had missed. Email timestamps that proved premeditation. Development schedules that showed impossible coincidences. Board meeting minutes that revealed strategic planning around emerging technology. There's something else, Emma said, hesitating. I've been monitoring Meridian's patent filings. Yesterday, they submitted provisional applications for 3 innovations that are remarkably similar to mine. Michael's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. They filed yesterday. Less than 24 hours after your presentation? Filed and fast-tracked for expedited review. The applications use different terminology, but the core methodologies are identical. That's evidence of willful infringement. Corporate theft doesn't usually happen this blatantly. Emma's phone buzzed with another text from Jessica. She'd sent 6 messages overnight, each more desperate than the last. Emma showed the screen to Michael. Jessica Williams. My former roommate at MIT, current senior manager at Meridian. She was in the boardroom yesterday. Potential witness. Potential problem. She's torn between friendship and career advancement. In that room, career won. Michael nodded, understanding the complexities. Corporate loyalty versus personal ethics. We see it constantly, but witnesses with internal access are invaluable, even reluctant ones. As if summoned by their conversation, Jessica appeared at their table. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect professional appearance disheveled. Emma, I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk. Jessica, meet Michael Thompson, my attorney. Michael, Jessica Williams, Meridian senior manager. Jessica's face paled as the implications registered. Attorney, Emma, you can't be serious about suing Meridian. I'm serious about protecting my work. You don't understand the position this puts me in. If you go public with accusations, everyone who was in that room becomes a potential witness. My career, your career, Emma interrupted, her voice carrying new steel, will survive. Mine won't if I let them steal 3 years of innovation. Michael observed the exchange with professional interest. Ms. Williams, what exactly did you witness in yesterday's board meeting? Jessica looked between them, realizing she'd walked into a legal deposition. I need to think about this. Emma, you're my friend, but I have responsibility. After Jessica left, Michael and Emma continued building their strategy. The legal framework was clear. Establish ownership through patent filings, prove access through Emma's employment, demonstrate appropriation through Meridian's subsequent filings, and document damages through market analysis. The timeline works in our favor, Michael explained. Your provisional patents predate any corporate knowledge of your innovations. Their filing immediately after your presentation suggests premeditation. Emma's monitoring software chimed with an alert. Another Meridian patent filing, this one for adaptive behavioral prediction algorithms, technology identical to her learning interface innovations. They're not even trying to hide it, she said, showing Michael the screen. Arrogant. They believe their size and resources make them immune to individual challenges. Michael's expression hardened with professional determination. They're about to learn otherwise. As they wrapped up their meeting, Michael outlined the next step: formal case preparation, additional evidence gathering, and preliminary motions to preserve documents and prevent further misappropriation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. One more thing, he said, as they stood to leave. This case will consume your life for the next year, possibly longer. Meridian will attack your credibility, your competence, your mental stability. They'll make you question everything you know about justice and fairness. Are you absolutely certain you want to start this war? Emma thought about her father's words, about 3 years of work dismissed as amateur hour, about Richard Blackstone's casual confidence that he could steal her innovations without consequence. I don't want to start a war, she said, but if they've already started one, I intend to finish it. Walking back to her apartment, Emma felt the weight of decision settling around her shoulders. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. By morning she would be a plaintiff in a legal battle that would define the rest of her career. Her phone rang. Unknown number, but she answered anyway. Miss Rodriguez? This is Marcus Weber. I heard through tech industry contacts that you might be having issues with Richard Blackstone and intellectual property theft. Emma stopped walking. Marcus Weber, one of the former Meridian employees she'd researched. I'd like to meet, he continued. There are things you need to know about how Blackstone operates, things that might help your case. 2 hours later, Emma sat in another coffee shop, this time listening to Marcus describe a pattern of corporate theft that stretched back years. Sarah Kim joined them, then David Liu, former employees who'd lost innovations to Meridian's internal development process. He did the same thing to all of us, Marcus explained. Public humiliation, immediate termination, followed by rapid patent filings for technologies that mysteriously resembled our work. Why didn't you sue? Emma asked. Fear, Sarah admitted. Blackstone's reputation for destroying careers, the legal costs, the uncertainty. But you have documentation, David said, hope creeping into his voice. You filed provisional patents. That changes everything. Emma realized she wasn't just building a case anymore. She was assembling an army of engineers whose innovations had been stolen, whose careers had been sacrificed to Richard Blackstone's ambition. The war she'd decided to fight was bigger than her personal grievance. It was about whether individual innovation could survive corporate predation, whether justice meant anything in an industry built on stolen ideas. By evening, Emma had committed to something larger than revenge. She was committed to establishing precedent. 2 weeks later, she stood in the King County Courthouse, watching Michael Thompson file the most significant lawsuit of her life, Rodriguez v. and Meridian Industries, and Richard Blackstone, alleging patent infringement, theft of intellectual property, conspiracy, and wrongful termination. $50 million in damages. The number had emerged from careful calculation, the projected licensing value of her innovations across global markets, multiplied by 3 for willful infringement, plus punitive damages for corporate misconduct. It was enough to destroy Blackstone's reputation and seriously damage Meridian's market position. Within hours, the Seattle tech community exploded with reactions. Rodriguez files massive IP theft suit against Meridian-dominated TechCrunch's homepage. Former engineer claims CEO stole innovations, led the Seattle Times business section. Emma's LinkedIn profile, previously viewed by dozens, now showed thousands of connections and hundreds of messages. Meridian stock dropped 8% in after-hours trading. Emma's phone rang constantly, reporters, recruiters, former colleagues, and strangers offering support or condemnation in equal measure. She'd prepared for legal complexity, but not for media exposure that transformed her from anonymous engineer to public symbol. The call that mattered came from Daniel Carter, investigative journalist with TechWatch Daily. Miss Rodriguez, I've been covering corporate malfeasance in Silicon Valley for 8 years. Your case represents something bigger than individual grievance. It's about whether innovation can survive corporate predation. I'd like to tell your story. Emma met him that afternoon in a Belltown cafe, surprised by his youthful appearance and intense focus. Daniel had done his homework, arriving with research on Blackstone's history, Meridian's acquisition patterns, and the broader context of intellectual property theft in tech. This isn't just about your innovations, he explained. It's about a systematic pattern of appropriation that's been ignored because individual engineers couldn't afford to fight back. The interview lasted 3 hours. Daniel's questions forced Emma to articulate not just the facts of her case, but the principles behind it. Why sue instead of finding another job? Why risk everything for abstract concepts like justice and precedent? Because silence enables theft, she heard herself saying. Every engineer who accepts corporate appropriation makes it easier for the next victim. Someone has to draw a line. The article published the next morning under the headline, David versus Goliath in Silicon Valley, Engineer Takes on Tech Giant. Daniel's investigation revealed patterns Emma hadn't fully understood, a culture of innovation theft that extended throughout the industry, enabled by legal complexity and individual powerlessness. Response was immediate and polarizing. Tech executives publicly supported Meridian, praising Blackstone's leadership and dismissing Emma's claims as typical disgruntled employee behavior. Venture capitalists warned about the dangerous precedent of employees suing over collaborative innovations. But engineers responded differently. Emma's inbox filled with messages from developers, designers, and inventors who'd experienced similar theft. Some offered testimony. Others shared their own stories of stolen work and corporate betrayal. Jessica finally called. Emma, what you're doing? It's brave, but it's also destructive. Blackstone is furious. He's hired Robert Harrison, the best corporate defense attorney in Seattle. They're going to destroy you. They're going to try. I can't be part of this. My position at Meridian, my career. I'm sorry, but I can't testify against the company. Emma had expected this conversation, but the finality still stung. I understand. Do you? Because once this goes to trial, there's no going back. Meridian will use every resource to prove you're unstable, incompetent, or malicious. They'll investigate your personal life, your academic record, your relationships. Is proving a point worth destroying everything else? After Jessica hung up, Emma sat in her apartment, surrounded by legal documents, media requests, and messages from strangers. The quiet life of anonymous engineering had been replaced by the chaos of public battle. She'd wanted to protect her innovations. Instead, she'd become the face of a movement she hadn't intended to lead. Her parents called that evening, their voices tight with concern. Misha, her mother said, we saw the news articles. This is dangerous. Powerful people don't like being challenged. Your mother's right, her father added. We're proud of you for standing up for your work. But these corporate fights, they can destroy lives. Emma understood their fear. She'd grown up watching her parents navigate systems designed to marginalize working-class families. They'd taught her to work hard, follow rules, and trust that merit would be rewarded. The idea of deliberately provoking powerful enemies violated everything they'd learned about survival. I have to do this, she told them. If I don't, they win. Not just against me, but against every engineer who comes after. And if you lose, Emma had spent sleepless nights considering that possibility. Losing meant financial ruin, professional blacklisting, and personal humiliation. It meant proving Blackstone's assessment that she was, indeed, amateur hour. If I lose, at least I fought. The next morning brought Meridian's response, a statement dismissing the lawsuit as frivolous litigation by a terminated employee seeking undeserved compensation. They announced that Robert Harrison would lead their defense, bringing his perfect record of corporate victories to bear against Emma's claims. Michael called with updates on Harrison's initial motion. He's filing to dismiss based on employment agreements, arbitration clauses, and statute of limitations. Standard tactics to avoid trial. Will they work? Not with our documentation, but they'll delay proceedings and increase costs. Harrison's strategy is to make this case too expensive for us to pursue. Emma's bank account already showed the strain of legal fees, expert witnesses, and lost income. Michael had agreed to work on contingency, but court costs and technical consultants required immediate payment. The $50 million lawsuit was costing her thousands of dollars she didn't have, but the alternative, watching Blackstone profit from her stolen work while she found another corporate job and pretended it never happened, felt like death by 1,000 compromises. That afternoon, Emma gave her first television interview to Seattle's Channel 7 Evening News. Standing outside the courthouse where her lawsuit had been filed, she faced cameras and spoke words that would define her public image. This isn't about money. It's about whether individual innovation matters in an industry built on stealing ideas. Richard Blackstone thinks he can take whatever he wants because he's powerful enough to destroy anyone who objects. I'm here to prove him wrong. The interview aired that evening, transforming Emma from local news story into national symbol. Social media exploded with support and criticism. Venture capital firms issued statements, and tech conferences began planning panels on intellectual property protection. Emma Rodriguez had wanted to be an engineer who changed the world through technology. Instead, she'd become a plaintiff who might change the industry through precedent. The war she'd chosen was bigger than she'd imagined, with stakes that extended far beyond her personal grievance. But there was no retreat now. Every day brought new evidence of support from engineers whose stories mirrored hers, and new attacks from corporate interests threatened by the precedent she might establish. Richard Blackstone had dismissed her as amateur hour. Now he would discover what a determined amateur could accomplish when armed with documentation, legal representation, and nothing left to lose. Within days of the television interview, Emma learned that corporate warfare operated by rules she'd never imagined. The first attack was subtle. Tech publications that had praised her case began running articles questioning her technical competence. Former colleagues questioned Rodriguez's contribution to AI innovations, appeared in Silicon Valley Insider. Pattern of collaboration disputes in Rodriguez's academic record ran in TechFlow Weekly. Both articles cited anonymous sources at Meridian, who painted Emma as difficult, uncooperative, and prone to taking credit for collaborative work. The timing was too convenient, the coordination too precise to be coincidental. Character assassination, Michael explained during their morning meeting. Harrison's standard approach: destroy credibility before the case reaches trial. Emma discovered the scope of Meridian's response when her internet searches began returning results she'd never seen before. Negative reviews of academic papers she'd published, critical comments on her conference presentations, and detailed analyses of her engineering competence, all freshly posted and suspiciously comprehensive. Her social media accounts faced coordinated harassment. Anonymous profiles questioned her mental stability, suggested she was motivated by romantic rejection from colleagues, and shared altered photos that made her appear unprofessional. The attacks were too coordinated to be organic, but too numerous to combat individually. They're using reputation management firms, Daniel Carter explained when she called for advice. Corporate crisis consultants who specialize in destroying accusers. I've seen it before. They create an alternative narrative that makes you the villain. The professional isolation was worse than the public attacks. Former Meridian colleagues stopped returning her calls. Industry contacts who'd previously offered networking opportunities suddenly became unavailable. Conference organizers who'd invited her to speak rescinded invitations due to controversy. Amanda Foster, Meridian's head of legal, called unexpectedly. Emma, I hope you understand this isn't personal. Meridian is defending its interests. By destroying my reputation, by protecting intellectual property that belongs to the company. Your innovations were developed using Meridian resources, during Meridian employment, within the scope of your Meridian responsibilities. I filed provisional patents before presenting to the board. Individual patent filings don't override employment agreements. Your contract assigned all innovations to Meridian, regardless of when you filed personal applications. Emma had studied her employment contract countless times, but Amanda's confidence was unsettling. Are you saying my patents are invalid? I'm saying corporate employment law is more complex than individual engineers typically understand. After the call, Emma retreated to her apartment, feeling the weight of forces arrayed against her. Meridian's legal team, public relations consultants, and corporate resources created an ecosystem designed to crush individual challenges. She was David facing Goliath, but Goliath had lawyers, money, and media manipulation capabilities she'd never anticipated. Her parents called that evening, their voices strained with worry. Misha, we've been getting phone calls. People asking questions about your childhood, your academic record, your personal relationships. Someone called my principal's office. Her father wanted to know about your family background, whether we'd had legal troubles, financial problems. The realization hit like ice water. Meridian wasn't just attacking her professional credibility. They were investigating her family, looking for ammunition to use against her character. The privacy she'd taken for granted was being systematically violated. Michael's law firm began facing pressure as well. Corporate clients hinted that association with Emma's case might affect future business relationships. The managing partners scheduled meetings to discuss the reputational risks of taking on Meridian Industries. They're trying to isolate you completely. Michael explained. Professional isolation, social media destruction, family harassment. It's designed to make continuation impossible. Emma felt herself changing under the assault. The idealistic engineer who'd believed in corporate fairness was being replaced by someone harder, more calculating. She began documenting every attack, every suspicious coincidence, every coordinated effort to destroy her credibility. Her phone rang. Jessica Williams, calling from a blocked number. Emma, you need to drop this lawsuit. Blackstone is furious. He's hired private investigators to dig into your personal life. They're looking for anything: financial problems, relationship issues, academic irregularities. Let them look. You don't understand. They're professionals at finding ammunition. Everyone has something they don't want public. Emma realized Jessica was warning her despite the professional risks. Why are you telling me this? Because you're my friend. Because what they're doing is wrong. But I still can't testify. I can't lose everything for a case you might not win. That night, Emma sat in her apartment reviewing the legal battlefield. Meridian's counterattack was comprehensive: legal motions to dismiss, character assassination through paid consultants, professional isolation, family harassment, and private investigation into her personal life. She was fighting a war she'd never trained for, using weapons she'd never held against enemies with unlimited resources. The pure engineering problem she'd thought she was solving had become a complex challenge involving law, media manipulation, corporate power, and personal survival. But something had crystallized in the face of their attacks. Every assault on her character, every attempt to silence her, every coordinated effort to destroy her credibility, proved the importance of what she was fighting for. If Meridian would go to these lengths to avoid accountability, how many other engineers had they silenced through intimidation? Emma opened her laptop and began documenting the harassment campaign. If they wanted to make this about character, she would show the tech industry exactly what corporate character looked like when challenged. The idealistic engineer was gone, replaced by someone who understood that justice required not just documentation and legal representation, but the willingness to absorb punishment that would destroy most people. She'd wanted to protect her innovation. Now she was fighting for the principle that individual engineers deserved protection from corporate predation. The cost was higher than she'd imagined, but the alternative, proving that power could silence innovation through systematic destruction, was unacceptable. Amanda Foster called again the next morning. Emma, I've been reviewing your case files. There are things about Meridian's response that concern me professionally. Meaning I think we should meet, privately. The call ended, leaving Emma staring at her phone. Amanda Foster was Meridian's head of legal, the person coordinating their defense strategy. Why would she want a private meeting with the plaintiff, unless Meridian's attacks had crossed lines that even their own legal counsel found unacceptable? Unless Meridian's attacks had crossed lines that even their own legal counsel found unacceptable. Emma spent 3 sleepless nights considering Amanda Foster's cryptic phone call before agreeing to meet. They chose a small cafe in Fremont, far from downtown's tech corridor, where either might be recognized. Amanda arrived early, choosing a corner table with clear sightlines, the precautions of someone who understood surveillance. She looked exhausted, her usually immaculate professional appearance slightly disheveled. "Emma, what I'm about to tell you could end my career. Are you recording this conversation?" "No, because what Meridian is doing, some of it crosses ethical boundaries that I can't professionally ignore." Amanda opened her briefcase, revealing printed emails and internal documents. "Blackstone ordered the harassment campaign against your family. He personally approved hiring private investigators to dig into your personal life. He's pressuring our corporate clients to avoid Michael's law firm." Emma studied the documents, recognizing email addresses and corporate signatures. "Why are you showing me?" "Because I became a lawyer to practice law, not to enable corporate bullying." Amanda's voice carried the strain of someone who'd struggled with conscience and chosen principle. "I have daughters. Someday they might face similar challenges. I want them to live in a world where speaking truth doesn't destroy your life." The documents painted a comprehensive picture of corporate retaliation. Email chains discussing reputation management strategies, budgets for private investigation services, coordination with media consultants to plant negative stories about Emma's competence and character. "There's more," Amanda continued. "Internal emails proving that Blackstone personally ordered the appropriation of your innovations, development timelines showing impossible speed for original work, budget allocations for patent filings that were prepared before your presentation." Emma's hands trembled as she reviewed evidence that proved everything she'd alleged. "This is conspiracy. Premeditated theft. It's also privileged communication between corporate officers and legal counsel. Using it could get both of us charged with criminal violations. Then why show it to me?" Amanda gathered the documents, her decision made. Because sometimes doing the right thing requires breaking rules that were designed to protect the wrong people. As they prepared to leave, Amanda made one final offer. "I can't testify openly. It would violate attorney-client privilege and end my career. But I can provide information through intermediaries, suggest avenues for investigation, and ensure Michael knows what to look for in discovery." The meeting ended with Emma carrying secrets that could transform her case, provided she could figure out how to use them without destroying Amanda's life or violating legal protocols. Her phone rang as she walked back to her car. Daniel Cart. "Emma, I've been investigating Meridian's response to your lawsuit. There's a pattern of coordinated attacks that goes beyond normal corporate defense. I think they're using techniques that cross legal boundaries." "What kind of techniques?" "Manufactured social media harassment. Paid consultants creating false narratives about your competence. Pressure on your family and associates that might constitute witness intimidation." Daniel's investigation had uncovered many of the same tactics Amanda had revealed, but from external sources. The convergence of evidence suggested that Meridian's response was systematic and potentially criminal. "I want to publish a follow-up article," Daniel said. "Not just about your case but about corporate retaliation techniques being used against whistleblowers and legal opponents throughout the tech industry." That evening, Emma met with Michael to discuss Amanda's revelations and Daniel's investigation. The legal implications were complex. Evidence of corporate misconduct that might be inadmissible due to privilege considerations, but which suggested avenues for legitimate discovery. If we can prove systematic harassment, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to obstruct justice, we have grounds for additional charges beyond patent infringement, Michael explained. RICO violations, criminal conspiracy, civil rights violations under federal law. What would that mean for damages? It means we're not just talking about patent infringement anymore. We're talking about criminal enterprise that could result in criminal prosecution of corporate officers. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 3 former Meridian employees want to meet. We have stories similar to yours. The meeting took place that weekend in Marcus Weber's living room. Emma found herself surrounded by engineers whose careers had been destroyed by the same pattern of appropriation and retaliation she was experiencing. Sarah Kim had lost innovations in natural language processing. David Liu had been fired after developing breakthrough algorithms in machine learning. Jennifer Martinez had seen her user interface designs incorporated into Meridian products with no attribution. None of us had your documentation, Marcus explained. We trusted the company, believed in corporate fairness. When our work was stolen, we didn't have legal recourse. Emma Rodriguez had wanted to change the world through technology. Instead, she was changing it through precedent. The decision to accept Amanda Foster's help came with stark moral clarity. Sometimes justice required destroying the careers of people who enabled injustice, even when those people were trying to do the right thing. The meeting took place in a downtown Seattle hotel room that Michael had reserved under an assumed name. Amanda arrived with 2 bankers' boxes of documents, her resignation letter already submitted to Meridian's board of directors. 14 months of internal communications, she explained. Her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was doing. Email chains between Blackstone and department heads discussing talent optimization strategies, budget allocations for appropriating employee innovation, development timelines that prove systematic theft. Emma reviewed the documents with growing astonishment. The evidence wasn't just comprehensive, it was damning. Blackstone's personal involvement in identifying and stealing employee innovations was documented in his own words, preserved in corporate communications he'd never expected to become public. This email, Emma said, pointing to a message dated 3 days after her presentation. Blackstone tells the development team to accelerate implementation of Rodriguez concepts using internal attribution. He's explicitly ordering them to steal my work. It gets worse, Amanda said, pulling out a separate folder. Here's the smoking gun. The document was a memo from Blackstone to Meridian's patent attorney, dated 2 weeks before Emma's presentation. It outlined plans to file patents for emerging AI innovations, and specifically mentioned neutralizing individual claims through strategic termination and immediate appropriation. Michael studied the memo with the focused intensity of someone who'd just found the key to destroying an opponent. This proves premeditation. Blackstone planned to steal your innovations before you even presented them. How could he know what I was developing? Amanda's expression darkened. That's the part that implicates Jessica Williams. She provided regular reports on your project status, technical briefings, development timelines, innovation descriptions, all forwarded to Blackstone's office. The betrayal hit Emma like physical pain. Jessica hadn't just witnessed her humiliation, she'd facilitated it. Months of friendship, shared lunches, and collaborative engineering had been compromised by Jessica's ambition and fear. There's more, Amanda continued. Internal emails showing Jessica knew about the appropriation plans. She was promised promotion and project leadership in exchange for cooperation. Emma felt something cold and final settle in her chest. The friendship she'd tried to preserve was already dead, killed by corporate loyalty and personal ambition. Using evidence that would destroy Jessica's career wasn't betrayal, it was acknowledgement of a betrayal that had already occurred. I'll use it, Emma said, her voice carrying new steel. All of it. The next week brought escalation from both sides. Michael filed amended complaints, adding charges of criminal conspiracy, racketeering, and witness intimidation. The evidence Amanda provided transformed Emma's case from civil patent infringement to federal investigation of organized corporate crime. Meridian's response was swift and vicious. Private investigators began following Emma constantly, documenting her movements and contacts. Her apartment building's security received inquiries about her mental stability and potential for violence. Former colleagues were contacted and pressured to provide negative character assessment. Her parents received threatening phone calls, suggesting that continued support for their daughter could affect their employment at Austin public schools. The intimidation was sophisticated, using economic pressure and social isolation to force compliance. But Amanda's defection had given Emma more than evidence. It had provided insight into Meridian's strategy and weaknesses. She knew what attacks were coming and could prepare accordingly. Jessica called, her voice breaking with panic. Emma, please don't use the internal email. My name is all over those communications. If they become public, I'll be fired, blacklisted, potentially prosecuted. You should have considered that before helping them steal my work. I was protecting my career. You understand corporate politics. Sometimes you have to choose sides. You chose. Now live with the consequences. Emma hung up, feeling the weight of transformation from idealistic engineer to ruthless adversary. The person who'd believed in corporate fairness and collaborative innovation was gone, replaced by someone who understood that justice required destroying the careers of people who enabled injustice. Daniel Carter's next article sent shockwaves through the tech industry. Internal documents reveal systematic corporate theft at tech giant, detailed Meridian's appropriation strategies, complete with specific examples and executive communications that proved premeditation. The story revealed that Emma's case was part of a broader pattern of corporate theft, spanning years. The article named specific executives, detailed their roles in appropriating employee innovations, and provided evidence of criminal conspiracy that federal prosecutors couldn't ignore. Meridian's stock price dropped 18% in a single day. Congressional representatives called for investigations into intellectual property theft in tech. The Securities and Exchange Commission announced preliminary review of Meridian's disclosure practice. Richard Blackstone appeared on CNBC that afternoon, his usual confidence replaced by defensive aggression. These are false accusations by a disgruntled former employee seeking undeserved compensation, he stated. Meridian has operated within all legal and ethical guidelines. We will vigorously defend against frivolous litigation designed to damage our reputation, but the evidence was too comprehensive. The documentation too detailed for simple denial. Amanda's materials provided a roadmap of corporate misconduct that federal investigators could follow through years of systematic theft. Emma's phone rang that evening. Robert Harrison, Meridian's defense attorney. Ms. Rodriguez, I think it's time we discussed settlement. Continued litigation serves no one's interests. I'm not interested in settlement. You should reconsider. Criminal investigation creates complicated circumstances. Federal prosecutors might view your actions as contributory if they determine you participated in corporate theft. The threat was clear. Even if Emma proved her case, she might face prosecution for her role in documenting corporate misconduct. But the intimidation felt hollow, desperate. Mr. Harrison, if federal prosecutors want to charge me for protecting my own innovations, they're welcome to try. I have documentation proving ownership, legal representation, and evidence of corporate theft that spans years. Think carefully about the consequences. Criminal prosecution could destroy your life. Richard Blackstone already tried to destroy my life. I'm still here. After hanging up, Emma sat in her apartment reviewing the battlefield. She'd started this fight to protect 3 innovations she'd developed at a company that had betrayed her trust. Now she was leading a federal investigation that could send corporate executives to prison and establish precedent, protecting individual engineers from systematic theft. The personal cost had been enormous: lost friendships, family intimidation, professional isolation, and transformation from idealistic engineer to legal adversary. But the alternative, proving that corporate power could silence innovation through systematic destruction, was unacceptable. Michael called with final preparation for trial. Federal prosecutors are moving forward with criminal charges against Blackstone and 3 other Meridian executives. Your civil case will proceed in parallel with criminal prosecution. We're seeking $50 million in damages plus punitive awards that could reach hundreds of millions. Emma understood that she'd crossed a point of no return. Win or lose, she'd established herself as someone willing to fight corporate theft with every available weapon. The engineering career she'd planned was over, replaced by something she'd never intended: leadership of a movement that could transform how the tech industry treated individual innovation. Tomorrow would bring trial preparation, media attention, and final confrontation with the people who'd stolen her work and tried to destroy her life. She'd wanted to be an engineer who changed the world through technology. Instead, she'd become a plaintiff who might change it through justice. The federal courthouse in downtown Seattle buzzed with media attention as Emma's case finally reached trial. Court TV had secured broadcasting rights. Tech journalists lined the gallery. Outside, protesters held signs, supporting both innovation protection and corporate rights. Emma sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a navy business suit that projected competence without ostentation. 6 months of legal warfare had transformed her from naive engineer to strategic adversary. But testifying under oath would be her ultimate test. Michael Thompson's opening statement laid out their case with mathematical precision. Patent filings proved ownership. Development timelines proved appropriation. Internal communications proved conspiracy. Damages calculations proved the scope of theft. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about whether individual innovation can survive corporate predation. He concluded. Emma Rodriguez developed revolutionary technologies that could transform how humans interact with artificial intelligence. Richard Blackstone stole those innovations through systematic appropriation that violates every principle of intellectual property protection. Robert Harrison's response was a masterclass in corporate defense. He painted Emma as a disgruntled employee seeking undeserved compensation, her innovations as collaborative work that belonged to Meridian, her evidence as selective documentation that ignored the collaborative nature of corporate research. Ms. Rodriguez wants you to believe she single-handedly developed breakthrough technologies while employed by a company that invested millions in her research. Harrison argued, the reality is that innovation in modern corporations is collaborative, iterative, and legally owned by the companies that fund development. Emma's testimony began on day 3. Michael's direct examination walked her through the innovation timeline, patent filings, and evidence of theft. Her engineering background allowed her to explain complex technologies in accessible terms, demonstrating both competence and credibility. Did you develop the ARIA ecosystem independently? Michael asked. Yeah, the core algorithms were developed during personal time, using personal resources, before any corporate involvement. How can you prove independent development? Emma referenced her documentation timeline sketches dated months before corporate knowledge, patent applications, filed before presentations, development logs that showed personal rather than corporate resources. Harrison's cross-examination attacked every aspect of her claim. He questioned her use of corporate computers for personal research, suggested that development during employment belonged to Meridian regardless of timing, and implied that her patent applications were strategic theft of collaborative work. Ms. Rodriguez, isn't it true that you used Meridian equipment, Meridian software, and Meridian time to develop these so-called personal innovations? I used personal equipment at home, personal software licenses, and personal time outside normal working hours. But you discussed these innovations with Meridian colleagues, received feedback from Meridian engineers, and incorporated suggestions from Meridian team members. I discussed technical challenges with colleagues the same way engineers have always shared knowledge. That doesn't transfer ownership to corporation. Harrison's strategy was clear: blur the line between individual and corporate innovation, suggest that modern research was inherently collaborative, and imply that Emma's claims represented dangerous precedent that could destroy corporate research investment. Amanda Foster's testimony proved devastating to Meridian's defense. As former head of legal, she provided insider perspective on corporate decision-making that no external witness could match. Did Richard Blackstone personally order appropriation of Ms. Rodriguez's innovations? Michael asked. Yes, he specifically instructed our patent team to file applications based on her technologies, using language that avoided attribution while maintaining technical accuracy. Harrison's cross-examination focused on Amanda's motivations for testifying, suggesting personal grievances and professional jealousy. But her documentation was too comprehensive, her knowledge too detailed for effective impeachment. Jessica Williams took the stand under subpoena, her reluctance obvious to everyone in the courtroom. Her testimony revealed the moral complexity of corporate loyalty, someone caught between friendship and career advancement, who'd chosen advancement. Did you provide regular reports on Emma Rodriguez's project development to CEO Richard Blackstone? Michael asked. Yes. Technical briefings were part of my management responsibilities. Did you know these briefings would be used to appropriate Ms. Rodriguez's innovations? Jessica hesitated, understanding that her answer would define her professional future. I suspected that possibility. Did you warn Ms. Rodriguez about potential appropriation? No. The single word carried the weight of betrayed friendship and corporate complicity. Emma watched Jessica destroy her own credibility to protect a company that had already decided she was expendable. Technical experts explained the innovations to the jury, demonstrating their revolutionary potential and estimated market value. Patent attorneys established the timeline of filings and appropriation. Former Meridian employees testified about systematic patterns of innovation theft spanning years. Daniel Carter's investigative articles were admitted as evidence of industry patterns, despite Harrison's objections about relevance and prejudice. The documentation painted Meridian's theft as part of broader corporate culture that viewed employee innovations as company property, regardless of legal ownership. The trial's climax came with Richard Blackstone's testimony. Under oath, he maintained that Emma's innovations were collaborative work that belonged to Meridian. Her termination was based on performance evaluation, and her lawsuit was motivated by professional disappointment rather than legitimate grievance. Michael's cross-examination systematically destroyed each claim using Blackstone's own communications. Mr. Blackstone, this email dated 3 days after Ms. Rodriguez's presentation. You instruct your development team to accelerate implementation of Rodriguez concepts using internal attribution. Can you explain that language? It refers to collaborative development of technologies that emerged from team discussions. Team discussions. Ms. Rodriguez was terminated the day of her presentation. How could she participate in subsequent team discussions? Blackstone's confidence cracked as Michael presented internal communications that proved premeditation, personal involvement, and systematic appropriation. The CEO, who dismissed Emma as amateur hour, appeared defensive and evasive under questioning that revealed the scope of his misconduct. The prosecution phase of trial lasted 2 weeks, building an overwhelming case of corporate theft supported by documentation, testimony, and technical evidence. Harrison's defense focused on employment law technicalities and industry practices, but couldn't overcome the evidence of systematic appropriation. Closing arguments synthesized weeks of testimony into competing narratives about innovation, ownership, and corporate responsibility. Michael portrayed Emma as an individual engineer fighting for principles that protected innovation itself. Harrison depicted her as a disgruntled employee seeking undeserved compensation through selective evidence and sympathetic presentation. This case will establish precedent that affects every engineer, every innovation, every corporation that funds research. Michael concluded, your verdict will determine whether individual creativity can survive corporate predation, whether documentation and legal protection mean anything when challenged by unlimited resources. Harrison's closing emphasized corporate investment in research, collaborative nature of modern innovation, and dangerous precedent of allowing employees to claim ownership of collaborative work. Meridian Industries invested millions in research facilities, equipment, and personnel that made Rodriguez's work possible, he argued. Corporate research depends on legal clarity about ownership. Precedent that allows employees to claim individual ownership of collaborative work would destroy innovation investment. The jury retired for deliberation, leaving Emma to wait for a verdict that would determine not just her personal vindication, but the precedent for intellectual property protection in corporate America. She'd started this fight to protect 3 innovations she'd developed independently. Now she was waiting for a decision that could transform how the tech industry treated individual engineers and their creative work. The wait would determine whether justice and documentation could overcome corporate power and unlimited resource. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict that would reshape the tech industry's understanding of intellectual property rights. Emma sat in the federal courthouse, her hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. 6 months of legal warfare, media attention, and personal transformation had led to this single announcement that would determine her vindication or destruction. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Morrison asked. We have, Your Honor, the foreman replied. On the count of willful patent infringement against Meridian Industries, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of conspiracy to steal intellectual property against Richard Blackstone personally, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of wrongful termination, with retaliatory intent, how do you find? Guilty. Emma felt the words wash over her like vindication, made manifest. The jury had not only found in her favor, they had accepted the scope of corporate misconduct that transformed simple patent infringement into criminal conspiracy. On the matter of damages, Judge Morrison continued, "What is your $47 million in compensatory damages, Your Honor? An additional $20 million in punitive damages." The courthouse erupted. Media representatives rushed for exits to file breaking news. Tech industry observers reacted with shock and concern. Emma's supporters cheered while Meridian's legal team sat in stunned silence. $67 million. The number represented more than financial compensation. It established precedent that individual engineers could successfully challenge corporate theft, that documentation and legal protection meant something when backed by sufficient evidence and determination. Outside the courthouse, media chaos reached fever pitch. Emma faced cameras and microphones with the confidence of someone who'd survived systematic corporate destruction and emerged victorious. "This verdict isn't just about my personal case," he said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "It's about whether individual innovation matters in an industry built on collaborative work." Today, the jury confirmed that engineers deserve protection from corporate appropriation, that documentation and legal ownership have meaning, that justice is possible even when challenging unlimited resources. Meridian's stock price collapsed, losing 38% of its value in after-hours trading. The company announced Richard Blackstone's immediate resignation and launched internal investigation into past practices that may not have met our current ethical standards. But Emma's moment of triumph was complicated by the personal wreckage surrounding her victory. Jessica Williams had been fired from Meridian hours after her testimony, her career destroyed by the evidence that revealed her role in corporate theft. Amanda Foster faced potential criminal charges for revealing privileged communications, despite her cooperation with federal prosecutors. That evening, Emma sat in her apartment, surrounded by congratulatory messages and interview requests, feeling the hollowness that sometimes accompanies complete victory. She'd achieved everything she'd set out to accomplish, but the cost in personal relationships and transformed identity felt almost unbearable. Her parents called from Austin, their voices mixing pride with concern. "We're so proud of you, Mija," her mother said. "You fought for what was right and won. But you've changed," her father added. "The daughter who left Austin 18 months ago was different from the woman we see on television." Emma understood what he meant. The idealistic engineer who'd believed in corporate fairness was gone, replaced by someone who understood that justice required systematic preparation for systematic warfare. She'd gained legal vindication but lost the naivety that had made engineering feel like pure discovery. Jessica appeared at her apartment that night, looking broken and desperate. "Congratulations," she said, her voice thick with bitterness. My career is over. Amanda might face criminal charges, and dozens of Meridian employees are losing their jobs as the company restructures to survive your lawsuit." "You made your choices," Emma replied. "I didn't force you to help them steal my work." "You're right, I chose career security over friendship. But did you consider the collateral damage when you decided to wage war against an entire corporation?" Emma had considered it. Sleepless nights weighing personal vindication against broader consequences. "Should I have let them steal my work to protect your career? Should I have accepted theft to avoid making waves?" "I don't know," Jessica admitted. "But the person who won this case, she's not the friend I knew at MIT. You've become as ruthless as the people you fought." After Jessica left, Emma confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. The fight had transformed her in ways that victory couldn't undo. She'd started as an engineer who believed merit would be rewarded, and ended as someone who understood that justice required destroying the careers of people who enabled injustice. Michael Thompson arrived an hour later, carrying champagne and legal documents finalizing the settlement. $67 million, he said, setting the bottle on her kitchen counter, the largest intellectual property settlement in federal court history. You've established precedent that will protect engineers for decades. At what cost? Michael studied her expression, recognizing the moral complexity that surrounded complete victory. Fighting injustice always has personal cost. The question is whether the alternative, accepting theft to avoid confrontation, serves justice better. Emma opened the champagne, but the celebration felt hollow. She'd achieved total victory in a legal sense, while questioning whether the person who'd won the case was someone she wanted to be. The next morning brought a phone call that forced her to confront the broader implications of her victory. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Senator Patricia Williams, from the Senate Judiciary Committee. Your case has raised questions about intellectual property protection that Congress needs to address. Would you be willing to testify about legislative solutions to corporate appropriation? Emma realized her legal victory was becoming a platform for systematic reform. The individual case she'd fought to protect her innovations had become the foundation for industry-wide change. A week later, she received a letter from the MIT Alumni Association, inviting her to deliver the commencement address about innovation, ethics, and individual courage in corporate America. The invitations multiplied: speaking engagements, consulting opportunities, book deals, documentary features. Emma Rodriguez had become a symbol of individual courage against corporate oppression. Whether she'd intended that role or not, but the transformation from engineer to symbol came with responsibilities she'd never anticipated. Every decision about how to use her platform would affect other engineers facing similar challenges. Other individuals contemplating battles against corporate power. Emma sat in her apartment, surrounded by legal documents that proved her victory. Checking account statements showing $67 million in settlement money, and interview requests from organizations that wanted her to represent causes larger than her personal grievance. She'd wanted to be an engineer who changed the world through technology. Instead, she'd become a legal precedent who might change it through systematic reform of how corporations treated individual innovation. The question now was whether she could find a way to honor both the engineer she'd been and the advocate she'd become, using her hard-won victory to protect other innovators without losing herself completely in the role of symbol and spokesperson. Justice had been served, but the person who'd achieved it was someone her family barely recognized and her former friends actively resented. The price of vindication, Emma was learning, extended far beyond legal fees and media attention. It included the fundamental transformation of identity that came with choosing principle over peace, justice over relationships, and precedent over personal comfort. 6 months after the verdict, Emma stood in the gleaming offices of Innovate Protected, the company she'd built with her settlement money to help individual inventors defend their intellectual property. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd used Meridian's money to create a direct competitor to their business model, where Meridian appropriated employee innovations. Innovate Protected defended them. Where corporations used legal complexity to silence individual inventors, her company provided accessible protection. Michael Thompson had joined as chief legal officer, bringing expertise in intellectual property law and understanding of corporate warfare tactics. Together, they'd hired former Meridian employees who'd been terminated for supporting Emma during the trial, creating a team united by shared experience of corporate retaliation. The Patterson case just settled, Michael announced, entering Emma's office with news of their latest victory. Automotive engineer versus General Dynamics. Patent infringement, wrongful termination, corporate conspiracy, $15 million in damages. Emma reviewed the case file, recognizing patterns she'd established. Documentation timeline proving independent development. Evidence of corporate appropriation. Systematic preparation for legal warfare that most corporations couldn't match. How many cases this month? 17 new clients. 3 major settlements. 2 criminal referrals for corporate theft. Michael sat across from her desk, his expression mixing pride with concern. We're overwhelmed with demand. Innovate Protected had become the destination for engineers facing corporate appropriation. Emma's precedent had encouraged other victims to seek justice, creating a pipeline of cases that demonstrated systematic problems throughout the tech industry. But success came with complications she'd never anticipated. Her phone rang. Amanda Foster, calling from federal prison where she was serving 6 months for revealing privileged communications. Despite cooperation with prosecutors, she'd been charged with ethics violations that ended her legal career. Emma, I saw the news about your latest settlement. I'm proud of what you've built. Amanda, I'm sorry about don't apologize. I made my choice knowing the consequences. What you're doing now, it's worth what we sacrificed. The conversation ended with Emma contemplating the human cost of justice. Amanda had destroyed her career to provide evidence that established Emma's precedent. Jessica had been blacklisted from the tech industry for her role in corporate theft. Dozens of Meridian employees had lost jobs as the company restructured to survive the settlement. Emma's victory had created collateral damage that haunted her success. That afternoon, she received an unexpected visitor. Richard Blackstone, looking older and more haggard than during the trial, appeared in her reception area. Miss Rodriguez, I wonder if we might speak privately. Emma agreed, curious about what the disgraced former CEO could want. They sat in her conference room, surrounded by patents and legal victories that had been built on the foundation of his destruction. I wanted to apologize, Blackstone said, his voice lacking the confidence she remembered. What I did to you. It was wrong. I convinced myself that corporate competition justified individual appropriation, that your innovations belonged to Meridian, because we'd invested in your employment. And now I understand that I was stealing dreams, not just ideas. Every engineer whose work I appropriated had invested years of personal creativity, just like you. I turned those investments into corporate profits, without attribution or compensation. Emma studied the man who'd dismissed her as amateur hour, noting the transformation that came with facing consequences for systematic misconduct. Why tell me this now? Because you've built something that protects other engineers from people like I used to be. That takes courage. I never had. The willingness to fight for principles instead of just profits. Blackstone left without requesting anything, apparently seeking only the opportunity to acknowledge what he'd done and what Emma had accomplished in response. That evening, Emma delivered a keynote speech at the Seattle Tech Conference, addressing an audience of engineers, executives, and investors about intellectual property protection and individual innovation rights. 18 months ago, I was terminated for presenting innovations that were subsequently stolen by my employer. Today, those innovations are protected by patents. That theft resulted in $67 million in damages, and the precedent established has helped dozens of other engineers recover compensation for appropriated work. The audience included many of the same people who'd shunned her during the legal battle. Now they listened with the respect accorded to someone who'd fundamentally changed industry practices. But individual victory isn't the point. Emma continued. The point is systematic protection for innovation that allows engineers to create without fearing appropriation. When individuals can protect their work, everyone benefits. Inventors, companies, and consumers who receive better technologies. After her speech, Emma was approached by Dr. Sarah Kim, the former Meridian researcher, whose natural language processing work had been stolen years before Emma's case. Thank you, Sarah said simply. Your precedent gave me courage to file my own lawsuit. We settled last month for $8 million. Similar conversations followed throughout the evening. Engineers who'd used Emma's precedent to recover stolen work, inventors who'd benefited from legal strategies Innovate Protected had developed, researchers who felt safer pursuing independent innovation because of protections Emma had established. Walking back to her apartment, Emma reflected on the transformation that 18 months had brought. The idealistic engineer who'd believed corporate fairness would protect innovation was gone, replaced by someone who understood that protection required systematic preparation for systematic warfare. But she'd found a way to honor both identities, using her legal victory to build something that served the innovation community she'd never stopped caring about. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Saw your speech online. Dad and I are proud of the person you've become, even if the path was harder than we'd hoped. Emma's relationship with her family had healed slowly. built on understanding that the daughter who'd left Austin as an idealistic engineer had returned as someone fundamentally changed by necessity and choice. The apartment she entered was different from the cluttered engineer's workspace she'd left 18 months before. Clean, organized, and professional, the home of someone who'd learned to separate personal space from work obligation. But her desk still held the original sketches for Aria, the innovations that had started everything. The technologies that Richard Blackstone had tried to steal were now protected by patents, implemented by ethical companies, and generating royalties that funded Innovate Protected's mission. Emma opened her laptop and reviewed patent applications from hopeful inventors seeking protection for their innovation. Each application represented someone who believed their creativity deserved legal protection, someone who'd learned from her precedent that individual engineers could successfully challenge corporate appropriation. The work was different from pure engineering, more legal strategy than technical development, more systematic protection than individual innovation. But it served the same community and protected the same principles that had driven her original fight. She'd wanted to change the world through technology. Instead, she'd changed it by establishing that individual innovation deserved protection. Part 6. Unexpected allies. Unless Meridian's attacks had crossed lines that even their own legal counsel found unacceptable, Emma spent 3 sleepless nights considering Amanda Foster's cryptic phone call before agreeing to meet. They chose a small cafe in Fremont, far from downtown's tech corridor where either might be recognized. Amanda arrived early, choosing a corner table with clear sightlines, the precautions of someone who understood surveillance. She looked exhausted, her usually immaculate professional appearance slightly disheveled. "Emma, what I'm about to tell you could end my career. Are you recording this conversation?" "No, because what Meridian is doing, some of it crosses ethical boundaries that I can't professionally ignore." Things were moved, papers were scattered. It felt like a message. Emma's blood turned cold. "Did you call the police?" "Your father did. They said without evidence of theft, there's not much they can investigate. But we know it wasn't random." The escalation from harassment to intimidation marked a new phase in Meridian's campaign. They weren't just attacking Emma's credibility, they were threatening her family's safety. Michael's response was immediate. "We're filing for emergency protective orders and requesting federal investigation of witness intimidation." This crosses every legal boundary. Daniel Carter's follow-up article, published the next morning under the headline, "Tech Giants' War Against Whistleblower Escalates to Family Intimidation." The story detailed Meridian's systematic retaliation campaign, drawing connections to similar patterns throughout the industry. Response was swift and polarizing. Tech executives condemned the article as irresponsible journalism that threatens legitimate corporate defense, but engineers and advocacy groups rallied around Emma's case as a symbol of individual courage against corporate oppression. Emma's inbox filled with messages from engineers sharing their own stories of stolen innovations and corporate retaliation. Patent attorneys offered assistance. Digital rights organizations provided resources for fighting back against harassment campaigns. The isolated individual challenging a tech giant had become the center of a movement she'd never intended to lead. Amanda Foster called again, this time with urgency in her voice. "Emma, Blackstone is escalating beyond what I can ethically ignore. He's preparing to file criminal charges against you for theft of corporate secrets. He claims your patent filings constitute theft of Meridian intellectual property. Is that possible? It's legal harassment disguised as criminal prosecution. Even if the charges are eventually dismissed, the process would destroy your resources and credibility." Emma understood the strategy. Criminal charges would make her a defendant instead of a plaintiff, shifting public perception and consuming legal resources she couldn't afford. "There's something else," Amanda continued. "I've been documenting Blackstone's orders and Meridian's tactics. I can't testify directly, but I can resign and become a private citizen with knowledge of corporate misconduct." The implication was staggering. Amanda Foster was willing to sacrifice her career to provide evidence that could transform Emma's civil case into criminal prosecution of Meridian's leadership. "You don't have to do this," Emma said. "Yes, because if we don't stop this pattern now, It will destroy every engineer who challenges corporate theft. Your case isn't just about your innovations, it's about whether individuals have any protection against systematic corporate predation. That weekend, Emma visited her parents in Austin. Their house felt violated despite the lack of visible damage. Her father, a former police officer, had installed additional security systems and taught her mother basic surveillance detection techniques. "We're proud of you for fighting," he said, "but we're also terrified of what they might do next." Emma understood their fear. She'd started a legal battle to protect her innovations and found herself at the center of a war that threatened everyone she cared about. But retreat was no longer possible. The evidence of corporate misconduct was too comprehensive. The pattern of victim intimidation too systematic. The implications for innovation protection too significant. Michael called Sunday evening with updates on their legal strategy. Amanda Foster submitted her resignation to Meridian effective immediately. She's agreed to provide testimony about corporate misconduct in exchange for witness protection. The federal prosecutor's office is reviewing our evidence of criminal conspiracy. What does that mean? It means your civil case for patent infringement has become a federal investigation of criminal enterprise. We're not just seeking damages anymore, we're seeking criminal prosecution of Richard Blackstone and systematic reform of Meridian Industries. Emma sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by engineering textbooks and science fair trophies, contemplating how a presentation about AI innovations had evolved into a federal investigation of corporate crime. The idealistic engineer who'd believed merit would be rewarded was gone, replaced by someone who understood that justice required not just truth, but the courage to absorb punishment that would destroy most people. Tomorrow she would return to Seattle to continue a battle that had consumed her life and threatened her family. But she would return armed with evidence, allies, and the knowledge that her individual fight had become a movement that could transform how the tech industry treated innovation and the engineers who created it. The war she'd chosen was bigger than personal vindication. It was about whether individual creativity could survive corporate predation, whether justice meant anything when challenged by unlimited resources. Richard Blackstone had started this conflict by dismissing her as amateur hour. Now he faced the possibility of criminal prosecution for systematic theft spanning years. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.